Thanks. My name's Bob Day. I'm from Adelaide, Australia, and like Mike, I'm also a builder. I wasn't going to mention this, but Mike's comments reminded me of an example which might kick off my talk rather well. Like Mike, I found some land on a very busy main road one day, which I thought could take about 14 or 16 townhouses or home units. So I put in the application to the local authority, and this particular planner was obsessed, shall we say, with noise, and he insisted that I build this a noise attenuation device, which is like a soundproofing noise abatement across the front. I tried to explain to him that people who don't like noise won't buy the units, and there are many thousands of kilometres, we call them, of roads with many houses there with no fences, and people like the noise. And when you visit these people and you hear the noise and you say, how do you stand the noise from the traffic? And they say, what noise? But he was having none of this. He insisted that I build this noise abatement system across the front of the fence, and it cost a lot of money and so on. Built the units, built the fence at the end, and no sooner had I built the units, but the Royal Society for the Deaf came along and bought all the units. I took the contract back to the planner, and he didn't even see the funny side. Anyway, look, it's a real pleasure to be here and listen to some of your speakers here. We certainly feel like we're not on our own. In Australia, we talk about the great Australian dream, and that's a quarter-acre block and a home of your own. Now, I might be preaching to the converted here, but we certainly believe that the home sits at the very heart of our lives, that it's not only the most significant investment that we make, but also it contributes towards the social and economic and physical well-being of our communities. And in any community where home ownership is what we call the reasonable expectation of the few, where home ownership is the reasonable expectation of the many rather than the privilege of the few, a sense of personal security and social stability prevails. High levels of home ownership in any community carry many benefits, not just to the individuals, but to the wider community, and as we've heard this morning, it's reflected in reduced crime rates, stronger social networks, and so on. Those of us who work in the housing industry, and I've been in it now for 30 years, we believe we have a special responsibility not just to keep building better houses, but to also to ensure to the greatest extent possible that home ownership remains within the reach of ordinary citizens. If people don't become first home buyers, then obviously they'll never become second home buyers, third home buyers, and so on, and the long-term implications of that for retirement living standards are serious. But we're seeing in Australia this great Australian dream squandered before our very eyes, and we don't talk of preserving the Australian dream anymore, like this conference, preserving the American. We talk about destroying the Australian dream, because by calling it preserving, you're letting those responsible for destroying off the hook. Because it certainly has destroyed the great Australian dream, and I dare say it's destroyed the great American dream for many thousands of young Australians and Americans alike. Now, some of the worst manifestations of this plethora of regulation has been the escalating cost of housing in virtually every Australian city. Housing in Australian cities now is more than 3 times the cost in real terms of housing in places like Dallas and Houston, where I've just spent 4 very, very interesting, memorable days. You can buy a house, as most of you probably would know here in Dallas and Houston, for about 2 times your annual salary. In Australia, it costs between 6 and 10 times the average annual wage, and Gwen will put those figures up. That's a great graph. Can I get that? You bet. That's very good. Now, the primary cause of this affordability crisis, which is entirely within the control of our state government, you'll be delighted to hear that a number of years ago, back in the 1960s, our state governments, they actually compulsory acquired or eminently, can you turn it into a verb, and eminently domained land? They eminently domained a lot of land around all our cities, and ostensibly for the purpose of ensuring an adequate supply of affordable land for first home buyers into the future. You know, what a very noble cause. They bought it, of course, at then rural rates, agricultural rates, which was about $1 an acre, which is not very much. And of course, they then took upon themselves. And they did this because you couldn't trust rapacious land developers, you know, to sort of, you know, to do this properly. The fact that over that same period, about 30 or 40 years, housing costs have actually remained fairly static. Housing building costs have remained fairly static, but land costs, of course, have gone through the roof. They discovered by drip feeding this land out to the public and putting growth boundaries that the land went through the roof, their revenues went up, and of course they were stuck with the original charter of ensuring an adequate supply for affordable housing. So they had a bit of a dilemma, so they solved the dilemma by changing the charter to now maximising financial returns. So that's written in their charter. And when I show them the original charter, which justified the acquisition of the land, with today's charter, what can they say? And to think that in a country like Australia, with just 20 million people, and a land mass similar to that of the United States, we could have a land supply problem, you know, is beyond comprehension. But it's true. Over-regulation in the areas of urban planning and building rules has become so extreme now that we now refer it to simply as the planning plague. We tell as many people as we can that, you know, this problem of affordability crisis is not some mysterious plague that has suddenly smitten our country and so on, but it's a direct result of these absurd policies. So one must ask, how did this come to be? How did we get to this state? And I've got a quote here from a book that we found called Australian Cities, Issues, Strategies and Policies for Urban Australia into the 1990s, which captures something of the mainstream urban planning thought and ideology. And it says this: Australian cities began to sprawl in the 19th century because a large proportion of the population was able to afford to live in a suburban setting. And this idea was generally supported and sustained by governments. Suburbanisation was sustained into the 20th century by the persistence of these factors and by new developments, encouraged dispersal, large-scale manufacturing, assisted migration, government subsidised home ownership, and the internal combustion engine. And while the current push for planned areas of consolidated urban land use with more space-intensive housing located close to workplaces, public transport, shops and community services is to be applauded, it's working against a big load of history, as past city building has caused jobs and housing to be scattered far and wide. Now this, you know, that's code for sprawl is bad, and it's infected the planning psyche to such a degree that, you know, any suggestion, I mean, you would not hear the kind of comments, addresses, papers that we've heard in this morning and last night in Australia. And this thinking was soon to infiltrate the regulatory framework with zoning and planning legislation, and the delegation then of all manner of planning powers to local regulation. And of course, it's caused land prices to go through the roof. And with urban, you know, this urban consolidation lobby having therefore all it needed to implement its plans, housing affordability vanished, what we say, quicker than free beer on a hot day. And it's become, whilst it's a dream for some, and it really is, there are something like 10,000 urban planners just working in the state governments. Again, we have a very small population. We have 6 states, not 50. And and there are more than 10,000 professional urban planners, and it's more than a dream for them. It's the next level up from there. It's become a nightmare for those most vulnerable in our societies. And when people on low and moderate incomes are locked out of home ownership, they're denied much more than a home. They're denied the sense of self-determination, all those other things. Now, regrettably, this planning plague has become and has spread much further than we ever thought possible. It's now into the micro-regulation sphere. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I think being allowed to build a house in a housing zone is not all that unreasonable. Let me share with you, just a little example of from one of my building companies in one of the states. The local authority, we sent in an application to build a house in this particular area, and the local authority, following an assessment of this application, they responded in this way. Are you ready for this? I need a drink before I read it.
You want some scotch or what?
Number one, the internal planning and orientation of the dwelling does not suit a desirable sustainability outcome, as there is little connection between the living areas of the home and the northern courtyard. Number two, there is insufficient room in the open courtyard area for a barbecue or a swimming pool. Number three, the roof pitch is to be 22.5 degrees, not 21 degrees, as proposed. It doesn't snow where we come from, so it doesn't
make any difference.
It doesn't rain very much either. So, number four, letterbox materials are to complement the dwelling. Number five, 2 of your selected palm trees are to be confirmed if acceptable. Number 6, the downpipes are to match the external wall colour of the house. Number 7, the backyard seating is to be a minimum of 200 millimetres, that's 8 inches, from the boundary, and on this thing went. Now clearly in this case the local regulatory authority considers it knows best what internal layout suits the family lifestyle of our customer. They're concerned about the aesthetic qualities of the letterbox. They know best what to plant in our customers' garden and insist that they get approval. Contrasting downpipes obviously doesn't appeal to their sense of good taste. And finally, they want to tell our customer how close to the boundary fence they can put their garden seat. Now, I don't know about you, but this sort of thing are examples of something a lot more serious. That they think they have both the right and the responsibility to govern such small issues in our lives is just plain frightening. Not to mention the cost, the confusion, and the difficulty it creates for ordinary people who just want a home of their own. National, state, local government planning and building controls now infiltrate our lives at every turn. And I suspect, from what I've heard, I suspect it's not that too much different in some of your states here. And can I quote one of your former presidents, Ronald Reagan? I'm inclined to say government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. Let me close with another brief story about a particular law, not the kind of law legislators make, but the law we call the law of unintended consequences. 10 years ago in my state of South Australia, in a reactive attempt to save some mature trees, a hotel owner cut down some very large mature trees in a very public area, and the public was so outraged that the government responded in the only way it knows how to do anything, and that's pass a law to save trees. And so they decided that any tree that had a circumference greater than 2 metres cannot be cut down. And I've got to tell you that today the tree lopping business is absolutely booming for any tree up to 1.9 metres.
Right.
So any tree that gets to 1.9 metres in circumference is just cut down. Just in case.
Yeah.
Because the owners realise that, they may not be able to cut that tree down in the future. And without doubt, the mature trees of tomorrow are being cut down by the regulation of today. And pretty soon, you know, we all know what will happen. If I can leave you with one emphatic message today, as you seek to preserve the American dream, is please don't follow our path. Only a free and open market devoid of excess regulation can deliver the kinds of results that will ensure that the greatest number of your citizens realise their dream, and that's the home of their own, and I wish you well in your endeavours. So thank you very much.
I'm really surprised. You know, I thought you were a bunch of rugged individualists down there.
On the football field we are.
You can do anything you want. This is really surprising. You mentioned inclusionary zoning. Who pays for it? Well, I've always heard that it was the builder's profit. He took it out of the builder's profit.
And I'm sure we can debate that, and that's a great fallacy that's out there, that we'll just increase these fees and it's going to get it out of the builders. Absolutely not. It's a direct pass-through, right?
Yes.
I pass through every single cost that I have, and I religiously guard my profit. I have to. I'm a public company. We guard our profit margin, and it gets passed through. So whenever I have the opportunity to suggest to policy people or to legislators that somehow they're going to scoop away capital from the builders to pay for their follies, I say, you guys are great. And we can't say it any more bluntly.